Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to On the Ballot. I'm your host, Norman Leahy, senior editor here at Ballotpedia, and we're continuing our discussion about the data and the numbers behind the November 4th elections, where a lot of headlines were generated, but there are a lot of stories yet to be told about who showed up, what brought them to the polls, and how did they actually pull the lever in the end. Joining me to help really dig into the weeds with this, and I know some of you love this stuff, is Maya Sweedler with the Associated Press, who's done a lot of visual data analysis of these races, and it's fascinating stuff. Maya, we'll link to your stuff in the show notes. But thank you for joining us on the ballot. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm
Now,
excited to be here.
Give us the 30,000-foot observation of what were the major trends that you saw in your reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to focus primarily on, I think, the gubernatorial races, it sounds like, as well as a little bit of the New York City mayoral race. So to take kind of that 30,000-foot view, we saw these very large swings towards the Democrats, particularly relative to the 2021 version of these races. So, for example, New Jersey saw a 10-point swing towards the Democrats. 4 years ago, you see Phil Murphy winning by a little bit over 3 percentage points in a re-election campaign that I think was much closer than expected. Mikey Sherrill won by almost 14 points this year. In Virginia, we had Glenn Youngkin winning by about 2 percentage points, and Abigail Spanberger won by almost 15 percentage points. So a very, very large swing towards the Democrat Party there. New York is a little bit harder to compare to the previous iteration because we have Andrew Cuomo, a very known quantity right former Democratic governor, running as an independent, kind of making this a three-person race. So we'll put the swings in New York to the side for now. But in general, we saw like quite substantial swings towards the Democrats.
And talk to me about turnout. It was pretty high in some places. New York City, as we mentioned before on the show, generational turnout in that race. 1969 was the last time you saw turnout numbers like this in New York City. What was going on?
It's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I think a large part of it is Mamdani bringing more people to the polls. He was the first candidate, I believe, since Bloomberg to get over 1 million votes. It was the first election since John Lindsay's election in 69 to see more than 2 million votes cast. New York is funny, though, because if you go back further, like about 100 years, it does tend to have fairly high turnout up until like the fiscal crisis in 73 until Watergate. It's a little bit hard to kind of understand what's going on here. And it really fascinates me, right? Like this is a city where you used to see turnout well above 60, 70%, right? Like after the 19th Amendment. And it drops off this cliff for like 50 years. And then we have this relatively high turnout election for New York City, which is fascinating, but something that I'm still, spending a little bit of time thinking about. I don't really understand what happened there, to be honest.
But there were shifts within precincts within New York City, for example,
Yes.
that had been more towards Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential race, going towards Mamdani. Is that how I read your chart?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fascinating thing about New York is that you see this like pretty substantial shift to the right in the 2024 presidential election. And I'm going to throw a caveat that you'll hear me say probably a couple times. I don't love comparing off-year elections to even-year elections just because of the differences in the electorate. And I'm about to do that right now. But New York and New Jersey were the two states that swung the hardest towards Trump in 2024 relative to 2020. We're seeing statewide swings in excess of 10 points. And it's particularly pronounced in these larger, more dense parts of the state. So Queens and Brooklyn, I believe, saw the two largest swings towards Trump of all of the counties in New York. And then you also have large swings in places like Bergen and Hudson County in New Jersey, these suburban counties adjoining New York City. So what we saw in the mayor's race is these places where Trump had done very, very well, really turning out for Mamdani. And I think that speaks to his particular strengths within the New York City electorate. He did extremely well in immigrant neighborhoods, in neighborhoods with high numbers of Asian voters. One thing that surprised me in looking particularly at Brooklyn and then at the Bronx as well, which did not swing as heavily towards Trump as some of the other boroughs, is that Mamdani did very well among Black voters in these very like these majority Black and plurality Black neighborhoods in New York City, which was not the case in the primary. But this is where he made up a lot of ground.
Well, now take me across the river into New Jersey and tell
Mhm.
me about Morris County, New Jersey,
Yeah.
and what your reporting has shown about turnout there.
So Morris County was one of the 5 that was it that one of the 5 that Trump won in 2024 that had not gone for a Democrat, very often. It's about 30 miles west of New York City, and it's the place where we've seen a lot of battles kind of being waged in the last couple of cycles. It's, like most of New Jersey, fairly suburban. It is fairly highly educated, so you're seeing kind of a lot of high information voters turn out. So the question is, what is driving them to turn out? So this is not something we can answer with the results themselves, but the AP conducted some polling out there. We have this thing called the AP voter poll, and the statewide numbers indicate that it was really the economy, same as it
Hmm.
was last year, bringing these New Jersey voters to the poll. There's a huge issue with cost of living in New Jersey. Electricity prices were a major focus for both Mikey Sherrill and Jack Tittarelli on the campaign trail. And that came up in a lot of polling both before and after the election about what was bringing people to the polls.
Now, let's go down Interstate 95 a ways to another county, Spotsylvania County in north central Virginia. You
Mhm.
talked about that one in your reporting too.
Yeah, that one really fascinated me because Spotsylvania is one of those counties where you don't actually see Democrats doing super, super well in it. It's actually a county that Republican counties had been winning in both presidential and gubernatorial elections for well, we only went back to 2016, but they had been winning it pretty consistently, including Glenn Youngkin, the Republican current governor, by more than 20 points back in 2021. Trump himself won it by almost 9 points. But you saw Abigail Spanberger actually win it this year by close to
Mm.
3 points. So this is a county about an hour south of Fredericksburg, which is a small city that is itself south of DC. So it's a little bit more exurban than Morris County, for example, but it's kind of you see the same trends. It is about 2/3 white, similar to Morris. It is fairly highly educated. It's above the national median income in terms of household median income there. So it's the types of voters that you really need to mobilize to win low or like non-Trump essentially elections. Um,
Yeah, Spotsylvania County is interesting because parts of it were Republican strongholds forever,
mhm.
and so those numbers are very interesting to contemplate. But talk to me more about trends. And I understand it. In New Jersey, there was a big trend, sort of. It's one of those trends that works right up until it doesn't.
Mhm.
It was a 60 years of what is it? Not electing somebody from the same party for a third term, and among other things. But what other kinds of trends do you think either were continued or broken or emerged in this election?
Yeah. I mean, this is the best and worst thing about off year elections, particularly those immediately following a presidential year, right? Like,
Yeah.
there are so many broader forces and trends here. One is that the president's party generally doesn't do well. So in New Jersey, that trend that you pointed out, that the state hadn't elected a party to a third term in the governor's mansion since '69. They also have elected a governor from the opposite party of the sitting president in every election from '89 to 2017. Murphy's narrow reelection 4 years ago being the exception. And Virginia, it goes back even longer. Starting in 1976, every time a party has won back control of the presidency, Virginia voters have chosen a governor from the opposite party the following year, which are two trends that held here, right? Like we generally see people swinging against the party in power, particularly if that party isn't viewed favorably. It's kind of this like thermostatic public opinion. The preferences shift in the opposite direction of government actions. Um, so I think that's one of the strong forces that we're seeing here.
And what are the trends that you think haven't really gotten the attention they deserve? Or you could say that they are flying under the radars, but what do you think the ones are emerging from these
Yeah.
elections?
I mean, there was a lot of conversation in 2024 around young voters, particularly young male voters. I don't think we have a ton of data right now on the age breakdowns of the electorate. What we do have from the AP voter poll, for example, is that young voters broke very, very heavily for Mamdani. I think our latest numbers had it as more than 3/4 of voters under the age of 30. So that's a trend that I want to keep an eye on. Where are young voters as we look ahead to the 2026 midterms? Are they turning out for a specific candidate? Are they motivated by economic forces? Are they motivated by something else? Like, what is bringing these folks to the polls? And why are they voting for the candidates that they're voting for? Is it partisan? Is it based on something else?
And one of the things too, you're a visual reporter. You put together a lot of your data in graphics so that people can understand them. Wha- how do you? That's a tough job. That's a tough job. I know that just from working on Ballotpedia newsletters, where we have to put together maps to show things correctly. But
Mhm.
how do you go about that? How do you show this data?
Yeah. I mean, the operating principle and the one that my team, and by the way, I work with a much larger team that are much more talented than I am. I am not the developer behind this. I'm not the designer. There's a really, really gifted team at the Associated Press. But the thing that we're always saying to each other is land doesn't vote, people do. We are constantly thinking about ways to visualize the electorate that emphasize the fact that like geography is actually not the operating principle here. It needs to be population centers. So one thing about our maps that we've really tried to prioritize over the last couple of years is visualizing raw votes, not just margin. So you'll notice that some of our maps will have bubbles, and the larger the bubble, the more votes that come from that particular jurisdiction. And then it'll be shaded by the winning party. But we're constantly thinking about ways to underscore like where elections are won and lost. And you can't do that if, most people are concentrated in a very small geography.
Right. And based upon, I guess, like to put a bow on this, what you saw coming out of this race, you mentioned where younger voters are going. What else do you think that we should really be keeping an eye on going into 2026? Because as I always say about Virginia elections, because I
Mhm.
wrote about them for far too long, is that this was the place where people came to test their messages.
Mhm.
And sometimes it was the graveyards of a lot of consultants' careers because their messages didn't go very far. What do you think? What should we be on the lookout for next year?
I would look to see where these parties are competing, right? Like, is this a midterm that's going to be waged in the suburbs, as we kind of saw in 2018? Is it going to be waged, over TV sets, and we're talking about a specific issue the way we saw in 2022? Are Democrats going to start making play for rural voters, right? Like, we've seen a
Mm.
lot of conversations about kind of staying away from that floor? Are Republicans going to try and hold on to the gains that we saw in 2024 among Hispanic voters? If so, what type of Hispanic voters, right? Do they focus on Texas and Florida? Do they go into, cities like New York? The other thing I think we should keep an eye on is how the national parties are doing in terms of favorability, right? Like we didn't actually see that much shift in terms of favorability towards the Democrats, which to me suggests that what we saw 2 weeks ago might not have been votes for Democrats. It might have been votes against Republicans.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
I think it's important to just kind of look at where general sentiment is on the parties overall and look at that, generic ballot, but make sure we understand what voters are unhappy with, what they are happy with, and how that affects their choices at the ballot.
And their choices of the ballot is something that Ballotpedia will be working very hard to make sure they have the information to make the choices that align with their values. Maya Sweedler with the Associated Press, we really appreciate you taking us on a journey through the data on the November 4th elections. Thank you for being on the ballot with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And I want to make sure that everybody stays with us because in the second half of this show, we'll be talking with Andrea Haley of vote.org, who's going to break down some other themes about voter turnout and voter registration. So you can look for that after the break. But until then, stay tuned and we'll hear more from On the Ballot.
Hi there, this is Abby Campbell. I'm on Ballotpedia's comms team. Election day confusion? Not with Ballotpedia's voter toolkit. From registration deadlines to polling locations, we've assembled everything you need for a smooth voting experience. Our nonpartisan toolkit includes registration links, ID requirements, early voting information, and our famous sample ballot lookup tool, all customized for your location. We've even got reminders for your calendar so you never miss an election. Voting should not be complicated. Let Ballotpedia be your compass. For more information, check out ballotpedia.org's voter toolkit.
And welcome back to another episode of On the Ballot. I'm your host, Norman Leahy. I'm a senior editor here at Ballotpedia. And obviously, if you were paying attention, there was an election on November 4th. Big stories coming out of that election, but we're still going through the data, the numbers behind that election, the results. And it's one of the things about elections that is important to know. It's not just who won and lost, it's who showed up at the polls and what got them there. And to help me go through those issues and some others is the CEO of vote.org, Andrea Haley. Andrea, welcome to On the Ballot. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
And just real quick off the bat, please tell our listeners and viewers what vote.org is all about.
Vote.org is the nation's largest registration and get out the vote platform. At vote.org, we are in all 50 states and we help people with the information they need to participate, from registration to absentee requests to polling place lookups, to a tool that helps people actually see what's on their ballot all the way up and down the ballot. Basically, a one-stop shop for anything that you need to vote. We have registered over the last 6 years we've helped register over 7 million people.
And of course, voter registration is the first and most important step to getting people to the polls. But there were a lot of interesting headline numbers that came out of these most recent elections. For example, I'm in Central Virginia, where there was a gubernatorial race. Turnout there was larger than it was in 2021, which was the high watermark for Virginia governor's races. In places like New York City, where there was a very highly publicized mayoral election, they had generational turnout, highest turnout since 1969. What were you seeing? What jumped out to you about the turnout numbers from these November 4th elections?
What was really interesting is that people are saying that there's a different story happening in all these different places, whether you're talking about Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York. I sort of see one big continuous story, which is people showed up because I think for the average American, things are getting tight and stretched and complicated, and they're showing up they're connecting the dots between the choices leaders are making and how it's affecting their personal lives. So in New York, we saw a huge turnout. In Virginia, I think turnout was up 20% over the last time there was a gubernatorial race. So mostly we saw an increase in young people turning up. We saw an increase in diverse people turning up, and we saw participation that was at pretty high levels, considering that it was not a midterm or presidential year. And I think this just speaks to the fact that Americans are looking for answers from their politicians.
And which sometimes is in itself a difficult thing to do, even in the best of conditions. But sometimes people will think that high turnout is a reflection of stress in an electorate, that when things are going sideways among some components of the electorate, turnout goes up. So that's generally what you think is coming out of this election?
I think stress, and I think in this election also, you had candidates with clear messages and visions. I do think people care about free and fair elections and about democracy. We also saw ballot measures in Maine get defeated that sought to restrict access to the vote. I think people don't, some people underestimate the how much Americans are paying attention. I think they're paying close attention. But I think the vision about what you're for instead of just always what you're against, it was also something that resonated this time. So I would say that young people in New York, sure, they're definitely feeling stress, but they also felt excitement. And I think that on the candidate side of things, that is such a motivating factor. I think people are tired of being in exhaustion cycles, and it's good. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, it's very exciting when leaders have a new vision for how to move forward. And I think that perked people's ears and increased participation as well.
Well, and you noticed, I believe, that in the people who were coming to your site using your ballot lookups, that they were skewing younger. Is that correct?
We did. We noticed that voters were skewing younger. We noticed it pretty early. We have the ability to capture a fair amount of sentiment analysis at vote.org. So we can see as an election cycle is approaching who's coming organically to the site, where they're coming from, what they're interested in. And people were starting to use our What's on My Ballot tool at record numbers. We were seeing a 100% increase. And that told me that not only are people looking to make sure they're registered and verify their registration, but they're really thinking through what choices they're about to make if you're looking at, what's on your ballot all the way up and down the ballot. So that was exciting to see, an engaged electorate that was doing its homework before the election.
Because it's one thing, and as you've been observing politics for a while, and so have I, that young voters were always that holy grail that everybody wanted to get, but always just seemed to be right out of reach. Do you sense that's changing?
That is definitely changing. I think continuously over the past few election cycles, one of the stories, with some exceptions, some ups and downs, but one of the overriding story is that I think we're seeing young people care about what's happening in their communities, in their cities, in their towns, in their states. And we're seeing them, lean in and understand. Okay, that means that I need to get civically involved and be civic minded, and that goes across the board from volunteerism to registering to vote to advocating for specific things they believe in. I think that um, on the local level, it's especially helpful, which we just saw in a whole bunch of local elections because there's you don't get lost in the noise of a presidential election where you don't maybe understand how all of these things might affect you personally or your family personally. But on the local level, certainly understand that city government is going to affect your day-to-day experience in the city. So
Yeah, and I strongly agree with that. A lot of people will, and quite naturally, because the press is focused here, think that the end and the beginning of politics is what happens in Washington D.C. When the reality is far more complex, and that really what affects you is the folks down in City Hall who fill the potholes, determine when your trash gets picked up, how safe your neighborhoods will be. That's really where democracy comes right up close and personal to you. A lot of people forget that. But one of the things too that we saw is, for example, mayoral elections in big cities like Minneapolis, Seattle, where there seemed to be uh, internal party fights. Georgia, where the Public Service Commission, you saw Democrats elected, I think, for the first time in a very long time. Mississippi, where Democrats, I believe, broke the Republicans' veto-proof majority in the state Senate. So, what's going on? Is that more along this theme of younger people showing up, voters stressed? What's happening?
I think voters are stressed. I think some campaigns are starting to pivot the places and spaces where they're showing up to talk to voters. If you're trying to speak to a 19-year-old who is interested in registering to vote, you really can't do that through traditional methods and means anymore. You have to think about where are their eyeballs already, what are the things they already trust and care about, and what are they willing to sign up for and do. And I think that you're seeing campaigns, sometimes people almost overanalyze. Was it this? Was it that? And I think a lot of it is shifting, it sometimes boils down to the simple shifting tactics to be in the places and spaces that people already are and using trusted voices. So for instance, at vote.org, we partner with all sorts of influencers on campuses. When I say influencer, I mean a micro influencer. So someone who's a student who will talk to other students about registration dates and deadlines, and then we'll send text messages to follow up to push that person out to vote once they register. We know the brand of vote.org is something that you just can't replace. People trust it as a nonpartisan site to get their information from. So I think what's happening here is that some the wiser campaigns are shifting tactics. They're meeting people where they are, and you're seeing people react to that.
Which, if you're a media consultant for a campaign, is not necessarily what I want to hear because, but we have an
Well,
enormous.
so the great ones adjust, and that would be my message to all those media consultants. It's as everything modernizes, you just have to adjust to make sure that people actually hear your message and that it's one that resonates with individual voters at a local level. And it doesn't mean throw the baby out with the bathwater. It just means that you have to have, more integrated approaches. And you're going to see over and over again that on both sides of the aisle, whichever candidate really shows up, in the absence of hearing your voice and your opinions, people make up their own storylines.
Mm.
So if you say all young people aren't going to vote, so we're only going to be on broadcast TV, you're abdicating the places and spaces where they are, and you're never getting your message across, and then saying, "Oh, look, they won't turn out." It doesn't work that way. It's showing up everywhere and realizing that everyone always tries to overanalyze. Does it benefit Republicans? Does it benefit Democrats? It benefits whoever has a message that resonates with somebody's day-to-day lived experience. And so I think that's the really big thing as we work to building a healthy and thriving democracy, is just how are you expressing the value that you bring to the table to the next generation?
And I know you're extraordinarily busy, so I want to get to this last one because it's the big question is there's midterms coming up in 2026. The calendar is already advanced. Filing deadlines are closing within days now in some states for congressional offices. What are the big things that you're looking for, not only in how campaigns approach voters, but what voters might be? What are voters thinking? What do you think? What do you think the trends are going to be?
I think we're going to see high participation in the midterms. I'm pretty optimistic about people who just showed up. If you're going to show up in a state election, you'll definitely show up in a midterm election. I think that we are going to see a lot of movement in the electorate, again, based around the top things that people care about: affordability, the economy, um, access to opportunity, and a vision. Whoever can articulate a vision for getting to a better place. I think that for better or worse, that the news cycle has captured people's attentions, and I think that they're keyed in a way that hasn't always been the case for midterms. And as we see these, the maps shift in different states, and it's a pretty live playing field for midterm elections. I think people understand that some of this, the redrawing of maps and right before the election and things like that, that's not exactly how things have always operated. And I do think that the American public wants to have its voice heard and understands the importance of showing up to continue to have free and fair elections. I think people are getting that it's not always a given that democracy thrives in the United States of America. So I think that they'll show up in midterms and protect our election infrastructure.
Because as we learned as children, showing up is one of the most important things you can do in life. And that goes double if you want to vote. And Andrea Haley with vote.org, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to discuss some of these issues with us on the ballot. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, you can learn more about vote.org in the show notes. We'll have those down below. And we'll have more on this topic on the ballot, of course, as we peel apart the numbers from the November 4th elections to find out what might the message be for 2026. Until then, I'm Norm Leahy, and I'll see you on the digital pages of Ballotpedia. Take care.